was sort of the wherein, and this applies for everyone, listen to listen, not to respond.
What's up, peoples? It's your bartenders, Mr. Z.
And your boy, Omega.
And we're back with another Women's Education Takeover. Returning to the bar is the one and only ZordonofDoom, accompanied by a fresh face to the podcast, Meron. Join us as these two educate us and our other returning guest, Marcel, as we dive deeper into the international feminine experience. As every episode, we want to thank all of you for listening. We truly appreciate you listening to our hearts and minds on varied and difficult topics.
Special thank you goes out to our Patreon subscribers for their support of the show. Every little bit helps us reach our goals to invite more high-profile guests and create bonus content.
And if you want to join in our conversation outside of this cast, feel free to hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at HaveADrinkCast, and make sure to use that hashtag hadCast.
Remember, this is always a conversation. If you don't agree, you want to voice your opinions, or even suggest a topic for an episode, feel free to join our Discord as well. The link will be in the description.
And please, if you like what we're doing here, share us with your friends, your family, your neighbors. Heck, engrave our words in the metal tablets so that children of the Wait, we've done this one already? Oh, well, your referrals mean a lot to us, as that's how we gain more listeners. So,
thank you again.
And get prepared to sit,
think,
and have a drink.
Welcome to Have a Drink Podcast. Enjoy the episode.
We said peace. What's up, peoples, and welcome back to another episode of the Have a Drink Podcast, where we invite you to sit, think, and have a drink. We're your bartenders, Mr. Z, and Omega spills his drink. That's what you get.
Oh my gosh.
And your boy Omega.
Oh, I hope you didn't lose too much of it.
I know that looked like a lot. That's
nah, we good. I just wet all my cell phones though.
All right, and joining us again at the bar, we have the amazing, the talented musical artist, content creator, amazing person altogether, ZordonofDoom, or also known as Zoreen.
Hey.
Hello.
And we also have another wonderful special guest this evening. She is a mother of two, a wife, as well as a pharmacist, and just an all-around amazing woman who has taught me so much over the last few years and has given me the gift of being her coach as well as the coach of her family. And I am introducing to you guys all to Marin Tedla. Let's clap it up for her.
Hello.
Hey.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
I feel so honored to finally have you here. We always have such great conversations in the garage. But now we get to actually have them online and share with the world. I'm very, very excited. So thank you for coming and sharing your gifts and your knowledge with us. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's truly a pleasure.
Absolutely. All right. And also entering the bar with us today is another return. Marcel, give it up.
Hey. For those of you that don't know who Marcel is one of my really, really good friends of over 20 years. He is a business professional, one of the greatest martial artists that I've ever had the pleasure of meeting and competing with and training with. And just, man, super, super intelligent man who breaks down a lot and brings so much to the conversation. So please welcome our great friend, Mr. Marcel Jones.
All right, welcome.
I appreciate that introduction, Mr. Goose. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, my brother. My pleasure.
So just like the beginning of this month, we are continuing on our women's education takeover. So we're thankful to have both of you joining us today, all three of you joining us, but both of you being able to give your insights, opinions, and, you know, be able to educate us, not just our listeners, but us as men, you know, being able to get more information is always appreciated.
Very much
Thank
so.
you.
Very much so. So with tonight, we really want to give you ladies the reins. We would love for you to just to take over. What is your thoughts on women supporting women? Do you feel like it is happening? Do you feel like there are ways that it could be better?
I'm all for it. I absolutely love seeing it in media, in people making it more seen, as opposed to the stereotypical, like in movies where women are always fighting over someone or something just to get ahead of one another. um I'm seeing it more and more, but when I was younger, at least, I was, in my experience with other women growing up, it was very much a competitive sort of thing. And it's probably the reason why I had deviated from wanting to hang out with more girls when I was younger, because it became very complicated and very, it wasn't what I wanted when I was a kid. So seeing it now and seeing my mind sort of open up and realizing that what was portrayed in like movies and what I saw on TV was not exactly reality, and being like, oh, women are not just superficial. Because I had been under this like strange impression that being a woman was synonymous with being weak. This was me growing up. Um, and so I tried everything in my power to just be human, just to be a person. I didn't want to be considered a boy. I wanted to be me, um, because that it became synonymous with that. So seeing women now supporting one another, whether it be musical artists or in media, or in other forms of media, it's very refreshing, and it makes me feel sort of guilty now, looking back and being like, why didn't I do that when I was younger? Why couldn't I see it then versus right now? I also feel like, in that sort of vein, it can be toxic, wherein no matter what another woman says, without checking information, without backup information, they're like, oh, you're 100% right. The Me Too movement.
Oh, the Me Too movement.
Yeah, the Me Too movement, which was great, but it also undermines other voices, and sometimes it hides the truth, and some people take advantage of that, because in every good situation, there's always going to be that one person that ruins it for everyone else. Yeah, I think that's sort of where my head space is regards to it. I love seeing it. I love seeing it now more than ever, especially for the newer generation.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you too. I think that there's more support for women now, women for women, excuse me, more so than before. I have a completely different background. I grew up in a very strong household where women were very, very strong. My mother worked, she had a nice, office job, just like my dad did. And they both, they saw each other as equals. And she always instilled in me, I'm an only girl. I have two brothers. I'm the oldest. And it was always, you always, fend for yourself, you get an education, you become independent, you never rely on a man for anything. And if you find a man that can be, a partner, he's going to be your equal. It's never, you being dependent on him ever. So that was something that was instilled very early on. So and there was a lot of that kind of role modeling where I grew up. And, so I had that. So it was never, the men would have, the hierarchy of like the man of the house, and they were the boss. But really, things didn't happen without the women. And the men knew it. It was just sort of in the background. And so you just knew how much more powerful the women were, even though they kind of were a little bit subdued. But my mother always talked about, how that I should have it even, I should be even stronger than she was in her life, you know, with her relationship with my dad, and just in, you know, being able to even support people in her office. She was in a position to be able to lift a lot of people up. Both my parents were the eldest in their family. And so there were a lot of younger siblings that were coming up, and they were responsible for getting them through, you know, education and whatnot. And most of them were women. There were only few men. And so my mom's goal was to always empower them and make them independent. She always pushed, and she was hard on them. And so I saw that as a kid, how much harder she was on the women than the men, because she wanted them to just be out on their own and be independent. So I learned that. And then when I came here, it was sort of like a culture shock, because it was really a man's world, but it was also like a white man's world. So I grew up in Ethiopia. Everybody looks like me, or we're all just different shades of black, right? So it was either men or women, or people that had money or not, or people in power or not, but everybody's the same color. So I came here and it was just like, okay, this is different. I have to pivot, right? But it was always, you know, all those lessons that we learned early on really made a difference. So I was, you know, deep down, it was always like, well, that's them, it doesn't apply to me. Like, I don't play by that rule. So I never even took it on, but I always would observe how, you know, even like going through school, like pharmacy school, um, the girls, even though they were smart, because they had to be smart to be there, right? They had to pass all these exams, standardized tests, blah, blah, blah. But especially the white girls, they would always play so dumb. And I could never figure that out. Like, why are they doing this? So it was almost like they wanted to be in the background. And I guess I was just too strong of a personality that I could never have any kind of a dialogue with any of the girls. I was on a different wavelength. Like, I could never see eye to eye with them. So growing up, going through school, it was really tough. Like, because I couldn't quite understand it was, and part of it is culture. Then I graduated, I started working, and there were no women of power, you know, in management or anything in my industry when I started. I've been doing this a little over 25 years, so it's a long time. But in the 90s in California, there were no women in management, middle management, upper management, nowhere. It was all white men. And it was incredible, right? But that's starting to change now. And we have a lot of women in power, but there's not very many women of color. And so I think because of that, the balance is not, how do you say it? It's sort of lopsided a little bit. And the women, you know, who are in these positions of power, there's also this, it's like a double-edged sword. I mean, it's wonderful that they're there, but they're also, I guess, trying to prove, you know, and play by the big boy, you know, rule. They're horrible. They're just absolutely horrible. They're difficult to work with. And you can't even communicate because they talk down to you. And so I find that, you know, women sometimes forget when they get in a position of power that they're supposed to really also be lifting others up. I think, you know, being a person in management really ought to be about lifting people up with you. And I don't see very much of it in my industry, unfortunately. It's horrible. It's really sad.
Yeah, I can totally see that, especially in a work sort of setting There's always, you always hear that story of why is there one or two. There's always, when it comes to women, there's always that gossip that goes on in the, when they talk bad about whoever for whatever reason. There's no need for that.
No.
It's like the only way some women feel like they can have a leg up is to compare themselves to other women, rather than as a whole, like lifting each other up.
Right.
And it's like you pull someone down to get up and out of the barrel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I don't know if that's expected, because then it's sort of seen as, oh, you know, she can be tough, you know, and so it's like, if you're going to show that toughness or, you know, that callous behavior of just cutting people down, because that's what corporate does. Corporate America is all about cutting people. Then I guess you're able to make it in that world, sort of thing. But I don't think it has to be that way.
Yeah, I don't either. I feel like there's an ingrained sort of sense of exclusivity in being the only woman.
Yes. Sort of like a gatekeeper, right?
Yeah,
like, I'm here and you need to stay there. Like,
right.
Yeah.
And it's like, why?
You can't come into my world because, you know, maybe there's fear. Like, if there's more of them, you know, then they may
You're not
shift
special.
Exactly. I don't know. It's strange.
It is very strange. Like, the more I think about it, I'm like, that's weird.
It's really weird. It's toxic. And that's, I find to be toxic. Like, and they don't like strong personality. I have been told I'm very strong personality and could be extremely intimidating, which I think I'm really nice and just, you know, very humble and down to earth. And thank you. But that's usually what people say, like, oh, but you're so intimidating, right? And so I always bump heads with a lot of these women in management position, because I just, you know, you can't have an honest conversation. They always want you to just sort of, I don't know, maybe expect, and, you know, because they are in a position of power, you're supposed to be respectful. You know, I wouldn't treat them any differently if they were a white male. It's, to me, they're all the same. You know, it makes no difference. You know, but there's something about being a woman in a position of power that, I don't know, it's just, we have a lot to learn. We definitely do.
For sure.
So it's interesting. This is our second women's takeover, but I heard the same thing twice in
Is
both
that
episodes. Right? Yes. And what I heard was that the women have to dumb themselves down. Now, mind you, this came from a scientist. So this is somebody that has a PhD, as a top in her field, and said the exact same thing. That there are women that she feels like there are women that have to dumb down their smarts. And that's crazy to me, you know?
Yeah.
And my question to both of you, is do you think that is a cultural thing to have that strength? And do you think because of the culture, the American culture of how they have that hierarchy, you know, of the man is the head, do you feel like it is just ingrained in the culture for them to automatically feel that way? Whereas where you come from, it's not that way per se.
It might be, you know, that's interesting. I'm astonished to hear that sort of thing happens in the science community too. Like, especially these women are dumbing themselves down a little bit, especially if they're around other men. That's incredible. Because, you know, if you're sitting at the table and having in these roundtables, and you've earned that seat. You've earned that seat because of your smarts, and there's no need to dumb things down, right? If you have something to say, you ought to be able to say it. And if it's not acceptable, or they can, have a discussion, and it could be, whether it's accepted or not, that's a different thing. But you can't always be in the shadow as though, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you gave me this opportunity to be here. You earned it. You deserve to be there. That's why you're sitting at the table.
True.
So it may very well be cultural, but I'm just curious, was this person a person of color, or was
Yes,
it?
she was. Yes, she
Okay.
was. She was actually a Latina.
Okay.
And also I just want to make sure that I was speaking properly. And it wasn't so much just that they were dumbing down, but they were also being talked down to.
Yeah.
So it was more so they were focused on, you just, they'll overlook them in certain topics and go straight to the men
Yeah.
and overlook them, or they will be like, well, these are easier things you can handle type deal.
Yeah.
And that's where I meant when I was saying like they were dumbing it down, as in like not so much them themselves, being dumb, but as in, so I just want to make
that's
sure.
That's unfortunate. It may very well be a cultural thing, because I don't see in places where there's a lot of diversity. You don't tend to see that because people are accustomed to working with others. So in a predominantly white male dominated fields, it really is tough to get through. That it's a very tough mesh of framework that you have to bust through. Really is.
Almost like the good old boy mentality.
Oh yeah. And it's so funny. Like, if you are the type of person that couldn't care about those types of things, they know it. They would immediately pick up on that, and you get passed on or passed over because they won't tolerate it, right? So I've had plenty of those types of situations where I've had a lot of issues with upper management, where I'm just like, no, I'm not doing that, or I don't agree. And so things just sort of, I get past. But, it hasn't affected me personally, because I've been fine. Things have worked out for me. I wasn't so ambitious to where I wanted to, climb through corporate ladder or whatever. I was content because I wanted to raise my kids, having my little cushy schedule. So I got what I wanted, but I wouldn't let them push me around. But I think that sort of thing comes, I think it's a cultural thing, because it wouldn't be the same.
I wanted to respond to that point when you mentioned intimidation or intimidating in the workplace. So the question is, do you feel that an assumption around about women in the workspace is more of a male assumption of women, or do you think it is specifically a societal assumption, or specifically white male versus black male? My wife is like, if a female comes across intimidating or emotes a certain way, they're emotional, right? They're too touchy-feely. I believe a stereotype that some black men have is if they're intimidating, they're angry black men. So they come across headstrong, but not in a very cerebral manner, right? It's emotional in a different way. They're headstrong, but they don't work well with others. They're angry. But then maybe if other people of, the more the Anglo-Saxon area, they're intimidating, hey, that's Steve Jobs, right? He says what he wants, he means what he says, and everybody falls in line. Yeah. And I mean, not everybody agreed with his persona, but it got more praise, than it got more, pessimism or negativity, right? They're like, because of that anger, that intimidation, because of that emotion, he was able to spearhead many projects and many deployments within Apple, grow the company. And so the dumb it down reference that Anthony mentioned was like, do you think that society as a whole, men and women, have a false stereotype and prejudice against women in the workplace? Or do you think that's a male stereotype that they're putting on women, that like, men just think that when women say what they mean and mean what they say, leave them be, so do you think there's a societal change needs to take place, or gender first with that?
Doreen, what do you think?
I feel like it's a compound ish. I think it's both.
I think so too.
It's a mix of both.
It's mixed.
Especially because as a society, we're kind of, we look at people, media really has this effect on, like, just like media news, everything we see or who our role models are. This is why I really believe that representation is really, really important, because who we listen to and who we idolize, like Steve Jobs, there's a specific way that they talk. There's a specific way that you were taught to talk to sound more professional. And I feel like in that sense, you remove who you are sometimes, in some cases, just to be packageable for the whole of society. And that goes for both men and women. And for women, there's like, I feel like there's an extra bow on there that needs to make it palatable. And when it's a little off, there's something that doesn't sit right. Like, oh, the colors are too loud. She's talking too much. It's uncomfortable when you see like a bunch of presents and then there's one that stands out, sort of situation. So I think it's definitely both.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think it's both. Men and women really need to think about and address these stereotypical, beliefs, nuances, and because it's women too would say. I mean, I was told by women that I work with, both my supervisor, like she's not my immediate supervisor, she's sort of my equal, but not, if you will, and someone that I supervise, that I was intimidating, because the problem was this person, instead of coming to me with a problem that they had, they went to her first to talk about their issue. And I said, well, she should have come to me to talk to me. Well, you're not exactly approachable because you're too intimidating. I'm like, well, that sounds like a personal problem. I mean, my response was, well, that's not my problem. She needs to figure out how to talk to me. Easy. I'm completely approachable. I'm all about building people, and I was at the time coaching her. She's going through some new position and I was coaching her, and I thought she was doing marvelous, but I was hard on her. I don't play. So I don't know, maybe she thought that I was just, I don't want to upset her. Maybe she'll get mad. But, so that's not fair, and because you would never say that if that was a man. A man couldn't be too intimidating. It would be, oh, he's strict, or, oh, he might get upset and I don't want to, be on the wrong side or whatever. That's what you'd say. But if it's a woman, then you would immediately, oh, it's this. So women do it too. It's not just men.
I think it's more the human condition. People don't want to indict themselves. They want to indict other people, right? Yes. So they're going to say that you're intimidating versus they lack courage. Right? Because even if you slice it 10 different ways, the general essence of the definition of courage is you have to have fear, right? You don't
Yeah.
call somebody courageous for doing something that they're not fearful of, right?
Yeah.
So when
Yeah.
it's pretty much they're fearful of communicating, they lack the courage. And I do think that is a stereotype and indictment on women that shouldn't take place.
Yeah.
You know, my wife's in a director position and people not, you know, communicating to her. She goes above and beyond trying to be positive and inviting. She's a black belt in martial arts, right? She's headstrong, she's goal oriented, but she still finds herself, I wouldn't say capitulating, but, you know, dumbing it down a little bit, but not being dumb, but dumbing it down the way in which she wants to approach work. Just because women hold a position, do you feel that they're getting the respect that they deserve based on that position? Or do you think that's, you know, just a facade? Like, look, we've got 13 women in government here, 13 men in government in the Philippines, you know, Malaysia. What's your thoughts on that?
I personally feel like part of it is very much a front. It's sort of like the Olympics, where there's an image. We show the image, and then, oh, they're here, but they're the models for whatever is actually going on behind the scenes. They don't really have the actual power that's being talked about. At least from what I personally know, like in the Philippines, or they're very much ingrained in whatever shady business is going on. And so they have their own sort of narrative, and their narrative aligns with everyone else in that sort of position. But I know that doesn't translate, like, for instance, like New Zealand, prime minister and stuff. So it really depends on where and the culture of said country.
Yeah, like Germany, for example. Like, how long has Angela Merkel been in power? And she's, you know, Germany's a pretty powerful country, right? But yeah, I think that in a way, we have this. We always want to be like, oh, you know, look at us over here in America. We're doing it right. We've got it figured out. You know, we're doing this, we're doing that, when really we're not. It's just we're basically scratching the surface, and there's other places that are probably doing it better. We still don't have enough people, you know, especially women of color in positions of power. I mean, it's incredible.
It's like the bare minimum.
How many women sit in, you know, the boardrooms in these, you know, corporations in the United States? I mean, I don't even know. If I haven't done the number. Have you, Anthony? Do you know? I mean, seriously, I don't think it's that many. And so there's a lot of work to be done still. And I don't know that there's enough opportunities. It's still very much a big boys club when you get up to the top. But I think other places, there are some places in Africa that are getting it right. I think my son was telling me just yesterday, I think it's Tanzania just elected their first new women president. You know, in the West Africa, I think it was Ghana or Sierra Leone, their prime minister was a woman, incredible woman, has done a lot for the country. And on the flip side of it, and this is not, it's neither here or there, but most of the time when you have women come to power, a lot of the time they actually do work, like good work. They tend to be less corrupt. Not to say that they can't be corrupted, right? But most of the time, you know, the women that have been in power have actually done well. So they have a really good track record. And so I don't know why we don't have more women in power.
I feel like it's probably because women have something to prove.
Maybe.
Especially women in power, they know the responsibility of
Yeah.
having all eyes on them.
On
So they
them.
have, yeah, they have no room for error, because even the smallest thing, just the way that a woman looks,
Yeah.
it's already plastered
Yeah.
all over media.
Yeah.
You still come to that crabs in a barrel kind of feeling and vibe. Um, I mean, I heard that there's still some toxicity within, you know, that idea of women supporting women to like a toxic level of like, you know, like you were saying before, or in the Me Too movement, but like also internationally, like having the women in power or women in those positions, like uh, either being involved in corrupt, shady things or being just the
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
face, you know, for what, you know, for what's happening. But I guess my question is, what would you want to see as far as support coming from other women, especially in these workplaces, and, you know, kind of like the experiences that y'all may have had overseas, in other places?
I mean, definitely there could be opportunities that could be created. Um, not to say that, you have to go out of your way to make sure that uh, you're really actively, creating stuff just for women. I think that everyone, there should be a level field, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you've got the merit, then you should be able to be afforded the position, period, regardless whether you're a man or woman or a person of color or not. But it's, I don't know, it just never works out that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always, um, people are very hesitant, I think, when about giving women a position of power, because again, that emotion. Oh, but they may be too emotional, so we don't know how they may tend to react. Or
Mm-hmm.
if it's an older woman, it's always something else. Or maybe she has too much baggage or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I hate that word. Anyway, if
That
you're
was good.
young, oh, they're just too hormonal. They're too emotional.
Mm.
It's all about touchy feely stuff. And by the way, touchy feely stuff, I'm not too fond of either, because I don't think it has a place in the workplace.
I agree.
And there's something about this new generation, and forgive me for saying that because I'm a little bit older, but there's a lot of touchy-feely stuff that comes up in the workplace, especially among women. I work with a lot of women and a lot of young people. And I try to tell them, like, you have to separate this touchy-feely stuff from work. Like, there's expectations and there's, things that have to be done. The touchy-feely stuff, it you have to find a way to sort of put it in the background, because you have to show up and do, period. uh, if you can't, you can't, and you just step away, but don't bring the touchy stuff. So I don't know where we're going in this society right now, because I don't know if it's because of how we are talking about emotions and maybe even mental health, to be honest. People are sort of, just um, not being able to differentiate certain things, what's appropriate, what's not in the workplace, what's appropriate outside the workplace. When do emotions come into play? When do they not? We are not doing very good job about distinguishing between all of these things. So it's getting really muddled. And so I think that gets in the way. That really does get in the way.
Now, I want to dive in on this because there is a part that's been on my heart this whole time when we were speaking about this. Um, Something that I've noticed, especially when it comes to women in positions of power, there's always this thing where like that has been repeated multiple times about them being so emotional. The interesting thing about that is I've heard that mostly from women first, speaking about other women. So
Oh,
now when I
really?
say that, I speak of like, I mean, I'm just going to talk about the elephant in the room, you
Yeah.
know, Vice President Madam Kamala Harris, right? Or even with the presidential hopeful at the time, Hillary Clinton, right? Everybody's like, well, we're not ready for a woman to run the country. She's too emotional. She's going to be menopausal. She's not going to know how to run the country. She's going to be angry. She's going to have this, that, and the other. And I'm like, and this is coming from women, and that was tripping me out. I was like, so what you're telling me is
Yeah.
you can't run your house because you're too hormonal.
Yeah.
Is that what you're telling me? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, why are you discrediting these women from being able to do their job? So you're clearly telling me that you believe in a male dominated sexist world.
Yeah.
You don't believe in equality or equity. You believe in let them lead and I just follow and I just do whatever they tell me. And that really bothered me. That tripped me out a lot. You know, especially being a father of a daughter, you know, I'm like, my daughters need to bow down to nobody. My daughter's a leader,
Yeah.
you know. And
Yeah.
my other thing too is the other thing that bothered me, you know, when you were speaking about the touchy feely, and it really kept coming back to me is hearing again, speaking about Madam Vice President, they automatically go to, well, she slept her way to the top.
Mm.
It's always they want to say some woman had to sleep her way to get to her position. She couldn't have just earned her position.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, and I've actually had to have this conversation a few times where I was like, so you're gonna look me in my face and tell me this woman slept her way all the way up to the
Yeah.
vice presidency? Yeah, well, I'm like, okay. So let's just say, so what if it's true? What man didn't do the same thing?
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to sit there and tell me any of those politicians wasn't doing their thug bizzle or their nasty bizzle all the way up to wherever their seat is. That's ridiculous. And they're like, well, this. I'm like, and I take extra offense to it because yeah, this is a black woman, so I'm going to protect black women at all costs. You know what I'm saying? Something they're like, you no, you can miss me with that. You know,
It's a double standard.
It really is. So when you ladies hear things like that, what does that do to you? Or what does that tell you? Or you as a mother of a daughter, like when you hear these things, like how are you able to break those things down for your daughter, if so? And Zora, as a young woman, seeing them speaking about older women or the women that are in a sense representing all of us or all of you, how does that make you feel to hear these things coming from other women as well as the men?
Well, because of my where I come from and having traditional Catholic parents who were from the Philippines, and I don't know if this is just an Asian thing or if it's a Filipino thing, but it's very much you're trying to assimilate into society. You're trying to, as much as possible, you blend in, and I was taught to whenever my mom would talk to me, especially when I was younger, you have to be a certain way. You can't talk that way. There were certain things wherein I couldn't be because I would be looked at differently, and that wouldn't be a good thing. And that had always bothered me because this is coming from my mom. And so to hear it from other people, it triggers me. It's not nice to hear because I don't do that. And that's why I get super defensive. And that's where like conservative parents, I feel like, or people who are very conservative, they're like, you can't dress a certain way. You can't wear a tank top. You can't do this, because then people will assume you slept to the top. They're going to assume you're this. And there's certain things you can or can't say, because you have to make sure that you look prim and proper in order to be in a higher position, or else it discredits you. There was I think there was a scandal with, I think it was this, I don't remember, she was a doctor, and she had, I don't think it was an OnlyFans, but she had pictures of her in her bikini, And then someone had posted it online and was saying that this discredits her from being a doctor for going to the beach and having these pictures. And that was like a huge thing in the medical community, being like, what, why? What's the big, she's an attractive woman. If it was anyone else, I don't think people would have had that problem, but she's very attractive and she looks like she could be a model. And other women had a problem with that.
And a pastor. She actually stopped pastoring and was making millions doing OnlyFans. And then they decided to ask her children to leave their school because of her having an OnlyFans.
I don't know if you guys have a religious background or a faith base, but just given, the Ethiopian and the Filipino, you talked on one part where you said your parents were, you said conservative. Don't know if it's H, don't know if it's Filipino, but you did mention Catholicism. Mm-hmm. So my question to both of you, do you think that religion is playing a role still, whether it be domestically or internationally, in how women are placed and how women are perceived? Because
hands down. Yeah.
Right. And then, do you feel that there should be more of a concerted effort to isolate or segment that? We have it in our Constitution, separation between church and state, but I still feel that it frames the narrative a whole bunch. Even if you do have women that are, competent, educated, if they are in a heterosexual relationship, they still probably are right under the threshold of their male counterpart, right? And it's, I don't see a lot of, objection to that. You have male pastors that are talking about women in their place or that. So how do you feel religion plays into how women are perceived, and what do you think are some material actions or efforts that should take place to push that out?
So for us, I belong, Ethiopia is, we have Orthodox Christians, but we also have Muslims, and then there's other types of religions too. And I'm an Orthodox Christian. It's a very, very, very old religion, thousands and thousands of years old, right? And based on old tradition and dogma, right? So there's virtually, women have no place. It's incredible. Inside the church, there are no female priests at all. It's not a thing at all. Monasteries, if you wanted to have a women monastery, it's only women. They have to be celibate, obviously, but they can't even mix with the men. But they have no power whatsoever inside the church. And so there's, and so a lot of the religious rules and traditions that we have permeate into everyday family life, obviously, right? And my parents were very strict, very traditional family. And, they sent me here when I was 16. So I went to boarding school, and I was also a very good kid. I never got in trouble. I did what I was supposed to do. I also wanted a good life for myself, obviously, but I never went outside their wish. I always wanted to make my parents proud too. It was also that part of it. But anyway, but I know people who I grew up with, and they came here and, just sort of partied all the time and blew their parents' money and, didn't graduate and don't have a good, life or whatever. But we grew up in a very strong, we weren't extremely religious, but had a very strong religious base. And so I always had that sense of, my parents can see me, but I have to be responsible. It was almost like that moral, ethical responsibility that's sort of like instilled in you early on. And so I was fearful of, just not telling the truth. I would never hide stuff. So, there was a little bit of that, but I really think that religion does play a part a lot in the immigrant community, the Ethiopian immigrant community. I mean, right now, the kids that are born here um, to parents who are a little bit older and more, grounded with Ethiopian culture, they want to raise their kids in America as though they would be raising them in Ethiopia. And there's a lot of friction. There's a lot of problem. We have a lot of problem in our communities. I'm not raising my kids like that. I'm a very liberal parent. Um, Even my brothers tell me how liberal I am, especially one of them who's just, both my husband and I were quite liberal. I'm very religious at the same time. And I don't force the religion, but I also, give them all the information and then let them choose and learn. And I feel like that, if I give them enough information, they will take that and, they can balance it in their lives. And it will probably benefit them later on as they get older. When you're younger, um, it's difficult to just pick up on what your parents are telling you, just like your parents were telling you, Zuri, about, don't wear this because it's going to look this way, or it's going to attract this kind of attention, or, um, it's not us, right? We're not that. Um, but so they were protecting you in a way to keep you sort of pure, if you will. You know what I mean? So I had those types of conversations with my parents. They came and saw me every summer, and we would have these conversations, and there was always also this understanding of, us, you know, us Ethiopians, or, we're Ethiopians. You're in Ethiopia. You're not American. This culture is not you. You're here to conquer it and get ahead. So don't get sucked into this artificial stuff because it's really artificial. So that was sort of told to us from a very young age. So I believed it, right? And part of it was true, and part of it was, really they were just trying to keep me straight and not get in trouble. So I believe that, but it worked. And so when I look back, for the most part, most of it was positive, um, and most of it was done out of just hoping that I wouldn't stray, right, and get lost. So it's done in goodwill, but we have to be careful when we're raising our kids, because my kids are different from me. They're Americans. If you ask them, they will tell you they're Americans first, and then they say they're Ethiopians second. So I have to raise them as Americans, but I have to make sure that they also have that balance, so that they can trade that water like really well.
It's very interesting with what you just said. Something, a saying that keeps coming back to me, especially coming from a very Christian household and background, is being in the world but not of the world.
Mm.
And that's something that kept ringing to me. Even with that, like how you just said, your children say that they're Americans first and then Ethiopian second. But they were raised in an Ethiopian American
Yeah,
household. And I
households.
almost
Yeah.
said that backwards. Notice that, and that's what I wanted to say. They were raised in an Ethiopian American household, where you guys are from Ethiopia. You brought that culture here, but you still recognize that they are in America. They are going to be Americans,
Yeah.
but they still have a very heavy tradition.
Yeah.
and understanding of their background, which is beautiful. So that's why I said that, being in the world but not of the world.
Yeah.
Because your kids are phenomenal. They
Thank
have
you.
amazing kids. They are they're
Thank
very
you.
respectable, highly intelligent, and no matter what their challenges have been, they've always overcome and exceeded those boundaries at all costs, because their parents are so strong and they do such a great job with raising them, but also leading by example. And I feel like that's such a very powerful thing, is leading by example. Don't do as I say, but do as I do. Like, look at what I'm doing, right? Like, for instance, like Zora, like, you are awesome. You are awesome. And I know this because I've watched you. I don't say much, but I watch you and I pay attention to how you move. And it is so amazing at seeing how you've gone through your ebbs and flows of your career, at how you navigate things, how you've taken upon these challenges and you overcome them, and you are just doing such a wonderful job, no matter what challenges have come. And that's due to you having such a great support system, both from from family as well as your friends, and I love seeing that. And I'm saying all that because these are strong women
Yeah.
surrounded by stronger women, and one is raising a very strong, independent woman. And that is very important. So to have that, so do you feel it's very important to have that strong women network around you for
Oh,
that
yeah.
success?
Absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's funny that you say that, because I grew up with, mainly, I don't remember much about like what my mom did for me growing up, because it was always my dad. I remember all of the bad things that happened versus all of the good things. It was something that I talked with my cousin about, and she was saying the same thing. She's like, I don't. She cried with her mom, because her mom, they had that conversation, and then she was like, I don't remember anything that you did for me growing up. And because Catholicism is so ingrained in Filipino tradition now, the male figure is, it it almost feels like I grew up trying to be a guy, if that makes sense. Because I had to fit an image, and I didn't want to be the weak person that my parents are divorced, weak person that my dad saw my mom was. So,
That's hard.
right. And I noticed it more when I was in the Philippines, and then seeing how different it is, how much religion and what your family teaches you, and how that sort of transfers to the kids that I was going to school with. Um, and how I think I was looking at like Facebook posts of some friends that I went to, because I went to a Baptist school, um, first and second year high school, which was so eye-opening for me, because going to from a Catholic school to a Baptist school, it was very different.
It's very different.
It's very different. And seeing and hearing women say that, it's their place, they belong at home as housewives, they shouldn't work, that's the life that they want, which is totally like, that's their thing, if that's really what they want. But it feels like it's what they were taught, and it's the only thing that they know. And that's where I sort of have a problem. And it was something that I grew up seeing, that there was something wrong. There's something wrong here, because I grew up in California, and then I went to third year and fourth year high school, and then college in the Philippines. Um, I was I was very much in my own world most of like school. But transferring, it was a huge culture shock, because not only did I have to wear a skirt, I had this specific uniform that I had to wear, wherein even here in the state, in my Catholic school here, I would always wear pants. It was just something I felt more comfortable being in. And going overseas and having to wear this skirt that actually you can't even lift your leg because it's one of those tulip skirts. So you can't even kick or anything in these skirts that have to be below the knee, and you have to do these certain things. And I was very, very outspoken when I was younger, growing up here. I got put in my place when I went to the Philippines, and I lost all of my self-esteem. And I tried keeping that sort of sense of self in high school over there, but it was very, very difficult to do that because I was met with just stares of like, why are you doing that? You shouldn't be doing that. We did, I think it was student council, and they're like, okay, you can, I think we were allowed to pick whoever we wanted to be, who we thought could be a good president. I was that person who was like, I think it should be me. And people were, they didn't say anything. They looked at me like, what are you doing? And then they kind of just let my comment die like it was a joke, and then they moved on. But yeah, just hearing, it's very, very much ingrained, and it's really funny because the really strong women, the women that I thought were really strong in that school, were the ones that they're like, people would say, don't hang out with them. They are doing bad things. They are going to be a bad influence on you. The girls, the guys, the teachers, they're like, oh, they're hopeless. They're not going to really do much. And one of the girls that I really looked up to, that I didn't say that I looked up to because of societal whatever, the culture in that school, she is now like extremely famous in the Philippines, and she started blowing up last year on TikTok. Like Lady Gaga follows her. Like, and it's so interesting that Filipinos are very supportive of Filipinos outside of the Philippines. Once they make it. If they don't make it and they're just like, just hustling, they're gonna be like, I don't know you're whatever. And then once they're on like American Idol, oh, Pinoy power, oh my gosh, I support this. But like, where were you? That entire journey, you weren't really there. And that's sort of like the general feeling that's present in Filipino American society, because it's strange. It's a strange sort of religion.
Question. So you mentioned the Orthodox Christianity and the parental structure and how you're going away from that, and you mentioned how the Filipino culture is and how you tried your best to be opposite of that. I think all of us probably are a fan of family as best as possible, stand together. But in the professional corporate world, I hear all the time, if somebody's not a good fit, they're just not a good fit, right? Do you feel that we need to adopt that same thought process, or do you feel that women should adopt that same thought process when it comes to family? We may want to be together as best as possible, but to your point you made, like, your parents are divorced, my parents are divorced, right? So our parental figures at some point said, we're just not a good fit. Do you think that during the development of adolescence into adult, if you start feeling some of that oppression and start getting some instruction and guidance that you don't feel is essential to your future, you just need to say, hey, we're not a good fit. What are your thoughts on vocalizing or detracting from the parental and family structure if you feel that it's not what you want? And do you think that will help lead to your mental and spiritual happiness sooner rather than later?
Right. That would have been nice. Like, I'm much older now. Knowing what I know now, if I had the knowledge that I have now, and I would tell my younger self to live differently, because I know it's not exclusive to just Filipinos or what I went through, because one of my friends who's going through this now, she's Chinese, and she was telling me how she's having that same issue with her family, where she doesn't feel like she can escape. She's like, I can't. It's not culturally safe for her to be able to. She's like, I don't know what to do, because she wasn't taught that way. It feels like a box that you can't escape from, and that's how I felt growing up. I felt like all I knew was my dad, my parents, and if I were to leave, I would die. That's how I felt like it was going to be, because they were like God. they were like that figure, and
They're in a
I couldn't
pedestal
do anything
somewhere.
Yeah. And I couldn't do anything. And it wasn't until I was in my like late 20s when I had a conversation with my dad, and realizing that parents are just people with different experiences.
Yep.
They don't know everything. I didn't know that growing up. I thought he had everything figured out. And that was just something, I think, because Asian parents stereotypically are like strict, you know? They present themselves as being perfect. Like, there's a hierarchy in family that you cannot cross, no matter if they're wrong. I had this I would butt heads with my grandma. Because she would I remember we were yelling at each other, because I was just like, you're not right though. That's not okay to say to another person. I don't remember the exact what we were actually fighting about. But afterwards, after we had cooled down, she sat next to me and she was like, Iha, you have to respect your elders. Even if I'm wrong, you have to say that I'm right. And that was like a big, what?
Yeah. I think that's common in a lot of cultures. I mean, we have that in my culture too. You know, the hierarchy for sure. You don't talk at your elders. You don't talk back to your elders or your parents. And I tell my kids, don't talk back to me.
Right.
I won't have it. So I'm, a little bit of, old fashioned when it comes to that, but it's not to say that, but they don't have a voice or they can't express themselves. And it's not that they can't tell me when I'm wrong, but there's a time and place for everything. Right.
Right.
And so a lot of the times, I think in a lot of cultures, including mine, we don't allow that space for younger people to allow them to grow and to nurture them in a way so that they can really mature. I mean, there's a lot of things that are just sort of kept covered up, or you don't talk about it, or it's just a taboo, or, and so is this way, but oh no, nobody's going to tell her anything because she's going to blow up. So we're just going to accept everything. And yet everyone will do something else, knowing that she's wrong. Nobody's going to face her, but they'll just move on. So there's ways to get around that. So the beauty of, like, for me and my husband, we have sort of figured raising our kids how to bridge the best of both worlds. And you can have it that way. It's possible. It's tricky because you really have to make sure that the child understands that you're, creating this world for them to understand. You can still disagree with someone without being disrespectful. uh, and that's okay. But if it doesn't have to be argumentative, and you don't have to talk down, or you don't have to um, be angry, but there could be a healthy conversation that could be had. But if that conversation can't be had in that kind of a manner, then it's probably easier just left alone. And what are the chances? You know, how many times do you encounter this person in your lifetime to have, you know, that much of an impact? You know, so if it's really not going to be that big of a deal, then just let it go. It's not worth it, right? So you have to be smart about how you navigate that sort of thing. But I was lucky, I guess. My parents, even though they were both very strict, my mom was very, her mother was extremely strict on her, raising her, because my grandfather was in the military and he wasn't always around. So the notion was, you know, we have this thing in our culture. If a woman raises you, you better be like, you know, someone that is, you know, well respected. You can't just be like a woman's child type of thing, like a single woman. I don't know. There's just some crazy thing. Anyway, so my grandmother in that way just wanted to make sure that her kids were proper and respectful and know how to, you know, run a household. And I mean, it was crazy. So my mom grew up, I mean, you could even almost even call it a little bit of oppression. She had to like learn how to make our bread, our injera, right? Like before school. So sometimes she would be running to school because the school was across the street from them on the first bell. And she would have like, you know, like all kinds of like stuff, you know, droppings from like when she was making the dough, like on her clothing, her school clothing, and she wouldn't have time to clean up. And so she understood what it means to be brought up in a household when everything is just so tight and you don't have room to grow and they're suffocating you, sort of, so to speak, right? So she allowed us to have that dialogue with her, even though, you know, she was still in that society that believed in those very things. We were sort of allowed to have that dialogue. My aunts in the household, you know, we often had conversations and she encouraged that. A lot of my older aunts had different types of experience. I had an aunt who was a revolutionary. It's crazy. Anyway, so she had a complete different perspective. And, you know, my mom wouldn't allow her to talk to us about politics, but my aunt was very well read. So it was always like, you know, talking about books and having just different perspectives. That was always welcome in the household. So that sort of shapes you into who you are. So it's a very delicate balance that you have between this very strict culture and religion, and then the hierarchy of elders and the men, and then all the women. And then the women, as powerful as they are, they may be sort of in the background a little bit, but you just watch and learn how people navigate that whole thing and how they behave around these, especially the matriarchs, right? I mean, because they snap their finger and stuff happens. And you're like, whoa, okay, she's powerful. Like, I want to be her. So you see that and you're like, well, how does that happen? And, you know, a lot of the times these types of women were very soft-spoken. They didn't say very much. They didn't have a lot to say, but when they said something or when they spoke, everybody listened, right? So you just kind of learn how to, you know, how people are navigating that whole power structure around these women. And so you learn, like, okay, and so was like that, and there were men that would be a husband, and he would just be like as loud and whatever, a very present person. But, when she came forward, he would be in the background. And so that was a learning moment. So I've had all of these like amazingly strong women, like my great aunt and my grandmother and my aunt that I grew up with and my mom. These were very strong, and there was a lot of women. We had more women, I think, in our family growing up than we did men. So I had a lot of these exposures, and so it was just like you just watch and learn, uh, and how their lives turned out, and who is doing what, where, and who has a voice now that's like everyone tunes into, like, when somebody speaks, like, who do they listen to, who do they pay attention to? So you kind of learn and you pick up. And so I try to raise my kids, especially my daughter, to try to make sure like I'm giving her a lot of that balanced upbringing that I had. And I hope I'm doing a good job, but we'll see. She's a very strong woman, incredibly strong, stronger than me.
I love that.
That's awesome.
I hear a lot of it as you both are talking of kind of mentioning the unsung power that and strength that women hold, especially within your communities, and whether that's you being an immigrant into America, or being living in your homeland, like or home country. You know what if at all, like, what does feminism look like internationally? Do you see it a lot? I mean, I know, because being American, we have such like this like bubble
Yeah.
of culture that we live in, because we have so many cultures involved. But I mean, there's this one overarching one that's like, ooh, but you should live in this, and you're like, oh, okay. So I mean, I don't expect it to look the same, but does it even exist out in other countries like that?
They're starting to have a conversation overseas. You definitely see it more now than before, but because the conversation when it came to women was, you have like mainly physical, like what you look like. I think last time we were talking about colorism and stuff. So that sort of image for women and men in the Philippines, to, if the lighter your skin, the better you look, type thing. The thinner you are, the more attractive you are, sort of mentality. But now you're having more of the conversation of like, just be you. But I'm mostly seeing that online, and the backlash to, say, what media is still doing in the Philippines, and being like, you should cast a person more appropriately for this particular role, rather than what is traditionally, the lighter skinned, tall, thin, model looking actress for a role that supposed to, instead of like tanning their skin. You know what I mean? It's not. And my idea of feminism definitely evolved over time, because it used to be like, oh, you have to be, feminism to me looked very much like, you're a strong, independent woman. Now I feel like whatever you are, that's feminism. It can even, what you perceive is you as a woman is feminism, because there are strong, independent women. Not all women are that like outspoken. They're very introverted women. Doesn't mean that they're not strong. They just have different positions. Some women want to work in the house. That's their dream. There are other women who don't want that. They whatchamacallit, they're models. They like doing like gravure or photo shoots and stuff like that. Um, and having more of the conversation now, like sex work is work. It's instead of putting people down just for who they are, I think equally bringing like women up is what feminism should be. And I feel like there are a lot of people who don't see it that same way just yet.
Yes, actually, I like that. I I I'll be honest, I've never really understood what feminism was. Like,
Mm,
I've never understood what the definition was. And I've just recently started reading and looking at different documentaries about women and just the movement and what it means. Because I grew up in an entirely different time, I guess, maybe.
mhm,
And so my experience was so different. I didn't, you know, we grew up during a Marxist communist era
mhm,
under a military regime. So my upbringing is so different that I didn't really have time
right.
to even dive into this whole feminist. I thought it was just an American thing. I'll be
Mm,
honest. You know, I'm like, what is this? Because back home, uh, women had they weren't very many women that were educated, but the few women that were educated had good positions. And I'm looking at my mom and how well she's doing, and to me, my mom's doing great. The world must be good, you know.
mm,
So that was my immediate world until I came here, and then I, was just navigating, going through school, and just different experiences, and not seeing enough women, and understanding, okay, women don't really have the same opportunities as men, and so therefore, okay, now I get it. This is probably what the feminist movement is about.
mhm,
So, but that was always in the background because, I was this little immigrant kid who was just trying to make it.
mm,
I couldn't be bothered with what was happening with the feminist movement, even though I was going to benefit, right? Eventually, I mean, because it comes full circle. Uh, but more than anything else, I just, yeah, it was a new concept. So I never really was very much in tune to it. But I really like what you said, sorry, about how it should be more inclusive and accepting women for who they are, just as they are.
yeah. Because I noticed, because I think before I had started reading up and sort of educating myself on what feminism or should be, there was that whole negative connotation that came with feminism, that it was that women want to be above men, that
Yeah.
and that there was that thing. And so I had never said that I was a feminist. And then I started hearing men say this and I was very confused. I was like, but that's not equality. And then I started digging deeper into what it was about and why there were certain people who claimed to be feminist, and it didn't sit well with me because it just sounded like they were putting down other women, because it's like you're putting criteria. You need a checklist for what a woman should be, and that's not how humans work. We are not just a checklist.
Yeah.
And that was like the main thing with me when I finally came to the understanding what feminism should be. It's equality for women.
Those were amazing 8 answers from both of you, because I love that perspective of it too, because I mean, even just mentioning, coming here and being an immigrant kid, just trying to fit in, trying to survive as just that, you're like, I had no time to even think about it. So, I mean, yeah, just to see the evolution, I mean, even within yourself and then to see the evolution happen around you. And
Mhm.
like, yeah, like what you said, Zora, like I 100% like agree with, it's not that yet, like
Yeah.
yet being the operative word, because I
Mhm.
mean, I know that we've talked a few times about it, but of like we always talk about the equity. I know, like as people of color, we talk about the equity gap between POC and non-POC.
Mhm.
And then having the conversation, adding being a woman to it, being a woman of color, there being that equity gap and that being something that essentially will be necessary.
What you were saying about how you didn't have any, like, you didn't really think about it growing up. And that's, I feel like it because America is in a place where they can have these conversations. You're not trying to, like, in the Philippines, they don't have those conversations. They're only just starting to, because they have the time to now. They're now looking at it from a different perspective. And a lot of Filipinos think that it's because of Western influence, so from America. And so there are some traditionalists who are like, why are you bringing this here? This was never an issue before. Or you have a lot of men in the workplace in the Philippines who are starting to be like, wait, but you did, this wasn't a problem before, and it's becoming more of like a talked about topic, but it's still very, very small compared to here.
Yeah. I think that exists very much in our country too. I grew up in the city, and cities tend to be more progressive by nature anyway. But in the countryside, life is very structured and everyone has a role. And unfortunately, the women bear the burden of carrying the family and doing everything. And they're basically just under the husband, have no say or anything. So I think you're right. If you go into those places and start having these types of conversations, they're going to be like, excuse me, why are you bringing this? You're disrupting our life, get away. They wouldn't have it. But it's changing. I mean, Ethiopia, I think right now has more women in power. Like they're leaders of different types of industries and in the ministries, like in education and health, taxation, that type of stuff. There's a lot more women in the cabinet, more women in parliament, but not only just more women, but more women of um, not the traditional, like predominant ruling tribe, but it's become more inclusive. And so I think that it's changing everywhere. So things that are happening here sort of have a way of seeping into other cultures. Young people demand it. They see what's happening, and they're going to want that to be a reality in their lives. So, somehow, those changes are happening everywhere, I believe. So it's a good thing. It's a good
I
thing.
agree.
And like my old instructor used to say, and still to this day says, change is good.
Change is always good.
Change is good.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Change
You
is
don't ever want to be stagnant.
never, never. So that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I know that we were talking on our last women's takeover episode, we kind of mentioned it, of kind of all of these things and how how the crabs and barrel mentality for women on women, it's all through the lens of that, like, male dominated society or lens. So I guess, what would you individually change about the assumptions made by men about women?
So the first thing I would say, if there was a way for, say, like, you have a round table of men sitting and a woman comes in, to have, whether she's presenting or whatever, I think a lot of the times the first thing the men would look at would be, is she pretty? What's her aesthetics, right? If there was just a way to get past that, and I don't know if we'll ever get there, but I don't know. That would be the one thing I would love to change, because it's almost like, people are not going to give you the attention you deserve if you're not good looking. It's really true. People who are good looking and well dressed, they could be bullshitting their way through. They've got everybody's attention. If you are not, if you don't have the looks, or you're not dressed a certain way, whether it's corporate America, whatever, you could be speaking the truth till kingdom come. Nobody listens. So that's what I'd love to change if I could.
That could also apply to men as well, when speaking as well.
Yeah.
It was sort of the wherein, and this applies for everyone, listen, not to respond. And I feel like if we come together with that sort of mentality, not to one up one another, but to actually listen from their perspective and be like, okay, I don't agree on certain things, but I need to let you finish. It's your stage. I'm listening to you, and sort of come to like a common ground. Cool. I think that the world would be a better place.
May I ask a question in regards to that?
Mm.
Do you feel that is one-sided, or do you think that happens on both sides, on both ends?
I think that happens on both ends.
And I ask that only because, like, for me, for instance, that is one big pet peeve I have, is being talked over and railroaded. Like what I have to say has no merit or doesn't matter, And then I realize that sometimes that happens. It's like some people overexert their dominance by trying to speak over another person and not let them finish.
Going back to what you said, Zor, of like listening to listen, like people want to be heard. People want to be understood. And when they don't feel like they're being heard and understood, I 100% could see that, like, they're just like, I'm gonna keep talking until you hear me. I'm gonna keep saying it till you understand what I'm trying to say. And it's like, well, hold on. Like, give it a moment, try to understand what they're saying in response. And if they're not lining up to where you're at, like, then come back to it. But like, don't try to go over, like, listen to understand, not to like speak.
I think that in particular, especially with women, I feel, and men who talk over, it comes from a place of feeling like somewhere, I feel like it's a past thing, where it comes from trauma of not being heard. And that's unfortunately something very difficult to change right away, because you don't know, or you don't feel it, or you don't see it until someone points it out, and then it becomes, oh, that's a flaw. And it can be embarrassing. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard finding common ground and trying to get people to see eye to eye. I think with women, especially if we're talking about men and women, like from a man's perspective, listening to a woman, and a woman's perspective, listening to a man, I feel like appearances for women are far more important than what a man looks like when it comes to listening, at least at the very beginning, like first impressions. Like, women have to speak or talk or look a certain way, present themselves a certain way. There's always a dress code for women. And that's I feel like where the problem is, and that comes from, and it starts in school. It starts in school, and you hear like stories now of like reason why a girl was taken out of classes because it's distracting the teachers. Why is it distracting the teachers? Excuse me, that's a little and so it starts very young, and it continues to progress as girls grow older, that it becomes their responsibility, whereas it should be like collective responsibility to grow and learn, rather than it be about your appearance is distracting me, or what you're saying and how you're acting is distracting me, so you should change yourself.
And it's interesting you say that, because it's not in the educational world, it is not I guess fair is the only way I can say it. And I say that because I work at a elementary / middle school.
Mm-hmm.
So the middle school girls are not allowed to wear certain things. But on the same campus, there's elementary school girls, little kids, wearing the exact same outfit that these older girls are wearing, but they don't say anything. And I'm like, you can't do that. Like, and I'm going to say the simplest thing. Let's just say a spaghetti strap tank top. And I'm using that very specifically because little girls wear that all the time. Nobody bats an eye to it. The moment she crossed over into middle school, then it's a problem. Now it's like, well, you can't wear that. That's revealing. That's this. I'm like, you can't tell these middle school girls not to wear that, but they look just across the campus and there's a second grader or fourth grader or even a fifth grader wearing that exact same shirt. That is called inconsistency, and that's not cool.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, so if you want that to be, if that's got to be law, then that's got to be law across the board. That means the boys are not allowed to be wearing tank tops either. They should not be wearing little muscle shirts. They need to have sleeves on their thing too. They need to have a full collar as well. It's called having that across the board. And I completely agree with that, you know, because even for me as an educator on campus, like there was one time when a young lady came on campus wearing an extremely tight cat suit for Halloween, and it was like a very form-fitting uh, cheetah suit. That's what it was. It was a cheetah print. And the reason why I remember this so specifically, and I'm speaking about this, is because we were doing, they do the whole walk around thing, so everybody sees their costumes. Everybody had something to say about this young lady's outfit. Why? Because she had the build of a grown woman in middle school, and they made a big deal about it. So that's kind of the teacher's aspect of it, because it's not always about the student, it's about the perception, because some kids do lie and get you in trouble. How do I know? Somebody tried to lie on me and get me fired before.
I think we allow optics to play a role more than the essence of what's going on.
Exactly.
And that's to your point, like the whole appearance of women, like we're allowing something that is literally based on subjectivity to define the narrative. And back to that point earlier about indicting other people versus criticizing themselves. So because females of a certain age more than likely will look more mature, hey, middle schoolers, you've got this explicit dress code. 5-year-olds, no, you don't. Why? Because if we say that elementary school kids, regardless of gender, but based on their physical appearance, have to have certain constraints, limitations at school. Why is that? Because little Johnny in second grade is going to hit on little, Julie. No, you're making an indictment on the adult person on their staff. You're saying that you don't think the staff will be able to comport themselves a certain way with the students. That is a narrative that you really don't want to put out there in the ethos, right? But, and so they don't, to your point, right? But unfortunately, we've had cases that have been litigated and adjudicated where some adult, male or female, was having inappropriate interaction with someone in the 8th grade, middle school, 7th grade, middle school.
Very true.
Right. And so because we have these, legal outcomes that have been criminal in nature, we've got to put constraints and limitations there. So do I think that the middle school and up shouldn't have those parameters or thresholds set upon them? No, because unfortunately, some adults have shown themselves not to align themselves with those guidelines. But to your point, yes, I think genders are very specific, but I do think we need to make it across the board, right? It's not going to be acceptable for a 6th grade male to walk around with his shirt off, trying to flex. So if a female can't have a certain top on covering their body a certain way, should be the same for that male, right?
And again, just saying, it's just about being consistent across the board. Because I agree with you, Zora. I don't feel like we should be telling anybody how they can or cannot dress or do certain things. But it's just.
I also, to that point, I also think that time and place is also very important to teach to kids. Dress code is important to teach to kids for the reason that it's for work. You're preparing them for what is acceptable in a workplace. Rather than it being about the sexualization, it should be more towards how we can better make you look better and present better for everyone. It would be consistent in that sort of way.
And I'm so glad you said that, because that young lady's grandmother came in ready to take on the world. And she started yelling at me. And I was like, who are you? And she's like, well, this is not fair. And this is that. I'm like, you do know this is a school. This is not a Halloween party. This is not an after school thing. This is a school. This is a campus. Like, we got dress codes regardless.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't come in here wearing my jujitsu spats with my crotch all accentuated and my butt all out. Like, I can't do that. I can't just walk around like that. Like, that's not okay for anybody, But they're like, well, this shouldn't matter. She's a kid and she's this and it's Halloween and it's a costume. I'm like, no, I'm like, ma'am, we just have dress code we all have to adhere to. And you're right. It's just about time and place, and also about getting ready for the workforce,
But I hear this common thing where we keep coming back to, which is fairness. Like trying to figure out the fairness within that those assumptions. I actually came across a video, and I sent it Omega's way a couple of days ago, or last week. I think it was last week, and it was, I don't remember who it was. It was another podcast. And they were talking about the idea of fairness as it relates to women and feminism, and the idea of equity or fairness in situations. And like Kevin Samuels was talking about the idea of fairness or equity, or what he hears women's rights desires being, his words, not mine. Y'all scream about wanting fairness, but then go to the club and still want to get into it for free. Or you like the I guess his words were, have your cake and eat it too. Like, you want to have your cake and eat it too.
Hey, I have to object really quick.
Go ahead.
Pet peeve. You should be able to eat your cake. It's your cake.
Right.
One word needs to be changed in that phrase. I have to object to that. That is my lifelong lifestyle pet peeve. That is the most, you didn't create it, so don't take offense. That's the most asinine, nonsensical, repugnant statement ever, right? You can't have your cake and eat it too. Literally one word has to be changed. You can't have your cake and eat mine too. Right?
Oh,
You to say you can't have your car and drive it too. What? That was my hard pivot out in left field. Ken Griffey's going to catch that ball. I had to quell that speech before you continued.
well, I mean, it makes sense. Like that does, like, changing that just a little bit does make more sense for the phrase. Because yeah, his point then being, like that of just like he was saying that that's the, that's the double standard. You hear it left and right. It's like, well, fucking double standards have existed for men this entire time. Like, I guess the point I want to come around to is, there's such this rigid idea around what the expression the expression of fairness within gender equity. How do we mold that to be less of have your cake and eat mine too, and be legitimately equitable in that sense? I guess addressing specifically the argument, I'm using the club analogy just because he said it, of like, you want equity but you also want to get into this thing for free.
Well, that's not feminism, is it? Because that's not fairness at all. That's you taking advantage of a male system, because you're taking advantage of what guys will do for females at the club. So it's women taking advantage of a male society, which isn't fair. So to that point, it is not feminism. And girls who think that way, they want the cake and yours too.
Now, I'm glad you said that, because first of all, I apologize. I am looking down a lot because I'm actually trying to find that video that we're talking about. I've been looking and I'm still trying to find it.
I'll send it.
And it's crazy because of all the things that they talked about, that one singular example pissed her off. And I'll tell you why. She's like, I don't go to the club. I don't do that. He said, excuse me, ma'am, I understand that. But what I'm trying to say is that's one that everybody on the panel could relate to, is that example. Well, I haven't been to the club in years and I don't go. I understand that, ma'am. But what I'm trying to explain is that is a relevant example that everybody can relate to. So are you telling me that it is not, that you will not go to the club? I mean, that you're against this. So you won't go to the club, and just because you're good looking, you'll make sure that the ugly girl gets in too for free, just like you, and make sure that her drinks are paid by all the other guys because you believe in equality and equity. She's like, well, no, that's on them. That's on the club. That's not my problem. I'm not going to stop them from their job. She's like, that's not what I asked you. You say you believe in fairness and equality. That means no matter how good looking or bad looking this person is, you want her to get in free just like you. Well, I don't go to the club. Well, that's not what and she kept running back to that, to where she was stuck on that one little thing and was not trying to hear. Now, Grant, I'm going to say this, and I want everybody to hear me when I say this. I don't agree with majority of what Kevin Samuels says, because we just come from two different points of views and tax brackets and age range and everything. But in this instant, I was actually understanding his point of view. I didn't agree with everything he had to say about it, but I understood it. And I've started to see that double standard coming out in that regard. And that's the sad thing is we all want to talk about equality as long as it benefits us. But the moment it doesn't, then it's like, yo, well, that's not fair. Well, but you said you wanted equal. This conversation has been phenomenal. And I really hope Z can put that video in our Discord so we can all have a conversation about it. And ladies and gent, I would love to invite you guys in there to come to check out the video and then give us your comments and also just talk about the episode in its entirety and tell us your thoughts about what was talked about on today's panel and episode. Well, I'd like to take this moment to thank everybody that's a part of our Patreon. Thank you for all your patronage and help and belief and support of our podcast as we continue to try and do bigger and better things and bring in more great guests that provide great insight on these great topics. Yeah, and I feel like I said great about 36,000 times. So I guess that means about 36,000 shots that everybody's going to be taking for me to saying great all the time.
I just recommend bake a cake and eat it.
Oh, well, there you
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, as per a Discord question for those of y'all listening, I mean, I wanna pose that question again, or that topic, like of what are your arguments or solutions surrounding fairness and its expression within gender equity? I would love to hear solutions more than I would love arguments, but I'm always willing to be educated. Can't go wrong with education. No. Also, if you'd like to continue in this conversation outside of here, feel free to hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at Have a Drink Cast, and make sure to use the hashtag hadCast. That way we can see whatever it is you post. As well as, if you decide to post your answer instead of in the Discord, you want to do it on your social media, make sure you use that hashtag hadCast. And a special thank you to our amazing panel. Thank you to both of our amazing women who joined us today. I appreciate coming for the first time and returning. As well as I want to give a special thank you to our brother Marcel. I appreciate you coming out and popping in with some questions and some knowledge. You always
and staying up so late, my brother, because I know it is late on your end. And Marin, I want to tell you, I am so proud of you because I was not easy on you today. You worked out by yourself and you beasted through that workout and you still made it to the podcast and stayed up this late. I am impressed and I am proud of you. Great job.
After working out with Omega and you're able to stay awake, woo! Props to you, because I remember after one of his kickboxing classes, I passed out on the mat. I'm like, I'm just gonna go sleep here. Grab your glasses. All right, kings, queens, and royals in between. I want to thank y'all again for joining us on another successful episode of the Have a Drink podcast, where we invite y'all back to sit, think, and have a drink. That's been us. Peace.
Peace.